Section 5 of The Girl with the Golden Eyes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Martin Geeson. The Girl with the Golden Eyes by Honoré de Balzac. Translated by Ellen Marriage. Section 5. When, after making an excellent meal, the two young men had traversed the Terrasse des Feuillants and the broad walk of the Tuileries, they nowhere discovered the sublime Paquita Valdes, on whose account some 50 of the most elegant young men in Paris were to be seen, all scented, with their high scarfs, spurred and booted, riding, walking, talking, laughing, and damning themselves mightily. "It's a white mass," said Henri, "but I have the most excellent idea in the world. This girl receives letters from London. The postman must be bought or made drunk, a letter opened, read of course, and a love letter slipped in before it is sealed up again. The old tyrant, crudel tiranno, is certain to know the person who writes the letters from London, and has ceased to be suspicious of them." The day after, De Marsay came again to walk on the Terrasse des Feuillants, and saw Paquita Valdes. Already passion had embellished her for him. Seriously, he was wild for those eyes, whose rays seemed akin to those which the sun emits, and whose ardor set the seal upon that of her perfect body, in which all was delight. De Marsay was on fire to brush the dress of this enchanting girl as they passed one another in their walk, but his attempts were always vain. But at one moment, when he had repassed Paquita and the duenna, in order to find himself on the same side as the girl of the golden eyes, when he returned, Paquita, no less impatient, came forward hurriedly, and De Marsay felt his hand pressed by her in a fashion at once so swift and so passionately significant that it was as though he had received the emotions surged up in his heart. When the two lovers glanced at one another, Paquita seemed ashamed. She dropped her eyes lest she should meet the eyes of Henri, but her gaze sank lower to fasten on the feet and form of him whom women before the Revolution called their conqueror. "I am determined to make this girl my mistress," said Henri to himself. As he followed her along the terrace, in the direction of the Place Louis XV, he caught sight of the aged Marquis de San Real, who was walking on the arm of his valet, stepping with all the precautions due to gout and decrepitude. Dona Concha, who distrusted Henri, made Paquita pass between herself and the old man. "Oh, for you," said De Marsay to himself, casting a glance of disdain upon the duenna, "if one cannot make you capitulate, with a little opium one can make you sleep. We know mythology and the fable of Argus." Before entering the carriage, the golden-eyed girl exchanged certain glances with her lover, of which the meaning was unmistakable, and which enchanted Henri. But one of them was surprised by the duenna. She said a few rapid words to Paquita, who threw herself into the coupe with an air of desperation. For some days Paquita did not appear in the Tuileries. Laurent, who by his master's orders was on watch by the hotel, learned from the neighbors that neither the two women nor the aged marquis had been abroad since the day upon which the duenna had surprised a glance between the young girl in her charge and Henri. The bond, so flimsy withal, which united the two lovers, was already severed. Some days later, none knew by what means, De Marsay had attained his end. He had a seal and wax exactly resembling the seal and wax affixed to the letters sent to Mademoiselle Valdes from London, paper similar to that which her correspondent used. Moreover, all the implements and stamps necessary to affix the French and English postmarks. He wrote the following letter, to which he gave all the appearances of a letter sent from London. My dear Paquita, I shall not try to paint to you in words the passion with which you have inspired me. If to my happiness you reciprocate it, understand that I have found a means of corresponding with you. My name is Adolphe de Gouges, and I live at number 54 Rue de l'Université. If you are too closely watched to be able to write to me, if you have neither pen nor paper, I shall understand it by your silence. If then tomorrow you have not, between 8 o'clock in the morning and 10 o'clock in the evening, thrown a letter over the wall of your garden into that of the Baron de Nucingen, where it will be waited for during the whole of the day, a man who is entirely devoted to me will let down 2 flasks by a string over your wall at 10 o'clock the next morning. Be walking there at that hour. One of the 2 flasks will contain opium to send your Argus to sleep. It will be sufficient to employ 6 drops. The other will contain ink. The flask of ink is of cut glass, the other is plain. Both are of such a size as can easily be concealed within your bosom. All that I have already done in order to be able to correspond with you should tell you how greatly I love you. Should you have any doubt of it, I will confess to you that to obtain an interview of 1 hour with you, I would give my life. At least they believe that, poor creatures, said De Marsay. But they are right. What should we think of a woman who refused to be beguiled by a love letter accompanied by such convincing accessories? This letter was delivered by Master Moineau, postman, on the following day, about 8 o'clock in the morning, to the porter of the Hotel San Real. In order to be nearer to the field of action, De Marsay went and breakfasted with Paul, who lived in the Rue de la Pépinière. At 2 o'clock, just as the 2 friends were laughingly discussing the discomfiture of a young man who had attempted to lead the life of fashion without a settled income, and were devising an end for him, Henri's coachman came to seek his master at Paul's house, and presented to him a mysterious personage who insisted on speaking himself with his master. This individual was a mulatto, who would assuredly have given Talma a model for the part of Othello if he had come across him. Never did any African face better express the grand vengefulness, the ready suspicion, the promptitude in the execution of a thought, the strength of the Moor, and his childish lack of reflection. His black eyes had the fixity of the eyes of a bird of prey, and they were framed, like a vulture's, by a bluish membrane devoid of lashes. His forehead, low and narrow, had something menacing. Evidently, this man was under the yoke of some single and unique thought. His sinewy arm did not belong to him. He was followed by a man whom the imaginations of all folk, from those who shiver in Greenland to those who sweat in the tropics, would paint in the single phrase, "He was an unfortunate man." From this phrase, everybody will conceive him according to the special ideas of each country. But who can best imagine his face, white and wrinkled, red at the extremities, and his long beard? Who will see his lean and yellow scarf, his greasy shirt collar, his battered hat, his green frock coat, his deplorable trousers, his dilapidated waistcoat, his imitation gold pin, and battered shoes, the strings of which were plastered in mud? Who will see all that but the Parisian? The unfortunate man of Paris is the unfortunate man in toto, for he has still enough mirth to know the extent of his misfortune. The mulatto was like an executioner of Louis XI leading a man to the gallows. "Who has hunted us out, these two extraordinary creatures?" said Henri. "Faith, there is one of them who makes me shudder," replied Paul. "Who are you, you fellow who look the most like a Christian of the two?" said Henri, looking at the unfortunate man. The mulatto stood with his eyes fixed upon the two young men, like a man who understood nothing, and who sought no less to divine something from the gestures and movements of the lips. "I am a public scribe and interpreter. I live at the Palais de Justice, and am named Poincet." "Good, and this one?" said Henri to Poincet, looking towards the mulatto. "I do not know. He only speaks a sort of Spanish patois, and he has brought me here to make himself understood by you." The mulatto drew from his pocket the letter which Henri had written to Paquita, and handed it to him. Henri threw it in the fire. "Ah, so the game is beginning," said Henri to himself. "Paul, leave us alone for a moment." "I translated this letter for him," went on the interpreter, when they were alone. "When it was translated, he was in some place which I don't remember. Then he came back to look for me, and promised me 2 louis to fetch him here." "What have you to say to me, nigger?" asked Henri. "I did not translate nigger," said the interpreter, waiting for the mulatto's reply. "He said, sir," went on the interpreter, after having listened to the unknown, that you must be at 10:30 tomorrow night on the Boulevard Montmartre, near the cafe. You will see a carriage there, in which you must take your place, saying to the man who will wait to open the door for you the word cortejo, a Spanish word which means lover," added Poincet, casting a glance of congratulation upon Henri. "Good." The mulatto was about to bestow the 2 louis, but De Marsay would not permit it, and himself rewarded the interpreter. As he was paying him, the mulatto began to speak. "What is he saying?" "He is warning me," replied the unfortunate, "that if I commit a single indiscretion, he will strangle me. He speaks fair, and he looks remarkably as if he were capable of carrying out his threat." "I am sure of it," answered Henri. "He would keep his word." "He says as well," replied the interpreter, "that the person from whom he is sent implores you, for your sake and for hers, to act with the greatest prudence, because the daggers which are raised above your head would strike your heart before any human power could save you from them." "He said that? So much the better, it will be more amusing." "You can come in now, Paul," he cried to his friend. The mulatto, who had not ceased to gaze at the lover of Paquita Valdes with magnetic attention, went away, followed by the interpreter. "Well, at last I have an adventure which is entirely romantic," said Henri when Paul returned. "After having shared in a certain number, I have finished by finding in Paris an intrigue accompanied by serious accidents, by grave perils. The deuce! What courage danger gives a woman! To torment a woman, to try and contradict her, doesn't it give her the right and the courage to scale in one moment obstacles which it would take her years to surmount of herself? Pretty creature, jump then! To die, poor child! Daggers! Oh, the imagination of women! They cannot help trying to find authority for their little jests. Besides, can one think of it, Paquita? Can one think of it, my child? The devil take me! Now that I know this beautiful girl, this masterpiece of nature is mine, the adventure has lost its charm." For all his light words, the youth in Henri had reappeared. In order to live until the morrow without too much pain, he had recourse to exorbitant pleasure. He played, dined, supped with his friends. He drank like a fish, ate like a German, and won 10 or 12,000 francs. He left the Rocher de Cancale at 2 o'clock in the morning, slept like a child, awoke the next morning fresh and rosy, and dressed to go to the Tuileries, with the intention of taking a ride, after having seen Paquita, in order to get himself an appetite and dine the better, and so kill the time. End of section 5. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey. Of The Girl with the Golden Eyes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Girl with the Golden Eyes, by Honoré de Balzac, translated by Ellen Marriage. Section 6. At the hour mentioned, Henri was on the boulevard, saw the carriage, and gave the counterword to a man who looked to him like the mulatto. Hearing the word, the man opened the door and quickly let down the step. Henri was so rapidly carried through Paris, and his thoughts left him so little capacity to pay attention to the streets through which he passed, that he did not know where the carriage stopped. The mulatto let him into a house, the staircase of which was quite close to the entrance. This staircase was dark, as was also the landing upon which Henri was obliged to wait while the mulatto was opening the door of a damp apartment, fetid and unlit, the chambers of which, barely illuminated by the candle which his guide found in the antechamber, seemed to him empty and ill furnished, like those of a house the inhabitants of which are away. He recognized the sensation which he had experienced from the perusal of one of those romances of Anne Radcliffe, in which the hero traverses the cold, sombre, and uninhabited saloons of some sad and desert spot. At last the mulatto opened the door of a salon. The condition of the old furniture and the dilapidated curtains with which the room was adorned gave it the air of the reception room of a house of ill fame. There was the same pretension to elegance and the same collection of things in bad taste, of dust and dirt. Upon a sofa covered with red Utrecht velvet, by the side of a smoking hearth, the fire of which was buried in ashes, sat an old, poorly dressed woman, her head capped by one of those turbans which English women of a certain age have invented, and which would have a mighty success in China, where the artist's ideal is the monstrous. The room, the old woman, the cold hearth, all would have chilled love to death, had not Paquita been there, upon an ottoman, in a loose voluptuous wrapper, free to scatter her gaze of gold and flame, free to show her arched foot, free of her luminous movements. This first interview was what every rendezvous must be between persons of passionate disposition who have stepped over a wide distance quickly, who desire each other ardently, and who nevertheless do not know each other. It is impossible that at first there should not occur certain discordant notes in the situation, which is embarrassing until the moment when two souls find themselves in unison. If desire gives a man boldness and disposes him to lay restraint aside, the mistress, under pain of ceasing to be woman, however great may be her love, is afraid of arriving at the end so promptly, and face to face with the necessity of giving herself, which to many women is equivalent to a fall into an abyss, at the bottom of which they know not what they shall find. The involuntary coldness of the woman contrasts with her confessed passion, and necessarily reacts upon the most passionate lover. Thus ideas, which often float around souls like vapours, determine in them a sort of temporary malady. In the sweet journey which two beings undertake through the fair domains of love, this moment is like a wasteland to be traversed, a land without a tree, alternatively damp and warm, full of scorching sand, traversed by marshes, which leads to smiling groves clad with roses, where love and his retinue of pleasures disport themselves on carpets of soft verdure. Often the witty man finds himself afflicted with a foolish laugh, which is his only answer to everything. His wit is, as it were, suffocated beneath the icy pressure of his desires. It would not be impossible for two beings of equal beauty, intelligence, and passion to utter at first nothing but the most silly commonplaces, until chance, a word, the tremor of a certain glance, the communication of a spark, should have brought them to the happy transition which leads to that flowery way in which one does not walk, but where one sways and at the same time does not lapse. Such a state of mind is always in proportion with the violence of the feeling. Two creatures who love one another weakly feel nothing similar. The effect of this crisis can even be compared with that which is produced by the glow of a clear sky. Nature, at the first view, appears to be covered with a gauze veil. The azure of the firmament seems black. The intensity of light is like darkness. With Henri, as with the Spanish girl, there was an equal intensity of feeling, and that law of statics, in virtue of which two identical forces cancel each other, might have been true also in the moral order. And the embarrassment of the moment was singularly increased by the presence of the old hag. Love takes pleasure or fright at all. All has meaning for it. Everything is an omen of happiness or sorrow for it. This decrepit woman was there like a suggestion of catastrophe, and represented the horrid fish's tail with which the allegorical geniuses of Greece have terminated their chimeras and sirens, whose figures, like all passions, are so seductive, so deceptive. Although Henri was not a free thinker, the phrase is always a mockery, but a man of extraordinary power, a man as great as a man can be without faith, the conjunction struck him. Moreover, the strongest men are naturally the most impressionable, and consequently the most superstitious. If indeed one may call superstition the prejudice of the first thoughts, which, without doubt, is the appreciation of the result in causes hidden to other eyes, but perceptible to their own. The Spanish girl profited by this moment of stupefaction to let herself fall into the ecstasy of that infinite adoration which seizes the heart of a woman when she truly loves and finds herself in the presence of an idol for whom she has vainly longed. Her eyes were all joy, all happiness, and sparks flew from them. She was under the charm, and fearlessly intoxicated herself with a felicity of which she had dreamed long. She seemed then so marvelously beautiful to Henri that all this phantasmagoria of rags and old age, of worn red drapery, and of the green mats in front of the armchairs, the ill-washed red tiles, all this sick and dilapidated luxury disappeared. The room seemed lit up, and it was only through a cloud that one could see the fearful harpy fixed and dumb on her red sofa, her yellow eyes betraying the servile sentiments inspired by misfortune or caused by some vice beneath whose servitude one has fallen, as beneath a tyrant who brutalizes one with the flagellations of his despotism. Her eyes had the cold glitter of a caged tiger knowing his impotence and being compelled to swallow his rage of destruction. "Who is that woman?" said Henri to Paquita. But Paquita did not answer. She made a sign that she understood no French, and asked Henri if he spoke English. De Marsay repeated his question in English. "She is the only woman in whom I can confide, although she has sold me already," said Paquita tranquilly. "My dear Adolphe, she is my mother, a slave bought in Georgia for her rare beauty, little enough of which remains today. She only speaks her native tongue." The attitude of this woman and her eagerness to guess from the gestures of her daughter and Henri what was passing between them were suddenly explained to the young man, and this explanation put him at his ease. "Paquita," he said, "are we never to be free then?" "Never," she said, with an air of sadness. "Even now we have but a few days before us." She lowered her eyes, looked at and counted with her right hand on the fingers of her left, revealing so the most beautiful hands which Henri had ever seen. 1, 2, 3. She counted up to 12. "Yes," she said, "we have 12 days." "And after?" "After," she said, showing the absorption of a weak woman before the executioner's axe, and slain in advance, as it were, by a fear which stripped her of that magnificent energy which nature seemed to have bestowed upon her only to aggrandize pleasure and convert the most vulgar delights into endless poems. "After," she repeated. Her eyes took a fixed stare. She seemed to contemplate a threatening object far away. "I do not know," she said. "This girl is mad," said Henri to himself, falling into strange reflections. Paquita appeared to him occupied by something which was not himself, like a woman constrained equally by remorse and passion. Perhaps she had in her heart another love which she alternately remembered and forgot. In a moment, Henri was assailed by 1,000 contradictory thoughts. This girl became a mystery for him. but as he contemplated her with the scientific attention of the blasé man famished for new pleasures, like that Eastern king who asked that a pleasure should be created for him, a horrible thirst with which great souls are seized, Henri recognized in Paquita the richest organization that nature had ever deigned to compose for love. The presumptive play of this machinery, setting aside the soul, would have frightened any other man than Henri, but he was fascinated by that rich harvest of promised pleasures, by that constant variety in happiness, the dream of every man, and the desire of every loving woman too. He was infuriated by the infinite rendered palpable, and transported into the most excessive raptures of which the creature is capable. All that he saw in this girl more distinctly than he had yet seen it, for she let herself be viewed complacently, happy to be admired. The admiration of De Marsay became a secret fury, and he unveiled her completely, throwing a glance at her which the Spaniard understood as though she had been used to receive such. "If you are not to be mine, mine only, I will kill you," he cried. Hearing this speech, Paquita covered her face in her hands and cried naively: "Holy Virgin, what have I brought upon myself?" She rose, flung herself down upon the red sofa, and buried her head in the rags which covered the bosom of her mother, and wept there. The old woman received her daughter without issuing from the state of immobility, or displaying any emotion. The mother possessed in the highest degree that gravity of savage races, the impassiveness of a statue upon which all remarks are lost. Did she or did she not love her daughter? Beneath that mask, every human emotion might brood, good and evil, and from this creature all might be expected. Her gaze passed slowly from her daughter's beautiful hair, which covered her like a mantle, to the face of Henri, which she considered with an indescribable curiosity. She seemed to ask by what fatality he was there, from what caprice nature had made so seductive a man. "These women are making sport of me," said Henri to himself. At that moment Paquita raised her head, cast at him one of those looks which reach the very soul and consume it. So beautiful seemed she that he swore he would possess such a treasure of beauty. "My Paquita, be mine." "Wouldst thou kill me?" she said fearfully, palpitating and anxious, but drawn towards him by an inexplicable force. "Kill thee? I?" he said, smiling. Paquita uttered a cry of alarm, said a word to the old woman, who authoritatively seized Henri's hand and that of her daughter. She gazed at them for a long time, and then released them, wagging her head in a fashion horribly significant. Be mine this evening, this moment. Follow me, do not leave me. It must be, Paquita. Dost thou love me? Come." In a moment he had poured out 1,000 foolish words to her, with the rapidity of a torrent coursing between the rocks, and repeating the same sound in 1,000 different forms. "It is the same voice," said Paquita in a melancholy voice which De Marsay could not overhear, "and the same ardor," she added. "So be it. Yes," she said, with an abandonment of passion which no words can describe. "Yes, but not tonight. Tonight, Adolphe, I gave too little opium to La Concha. She might wake up, and I should be lost. At this moment, the whole household believes me to be asleep in my room. In 2 days, be at the same spot, say the same word to the same man. That man is my foster father. Cristemio worships me, and would die in torments for me before they could extract one word against me from him. Farewell," she said, seizing Henri by the waist and twining round him like a serpent. She pressed him on every side at once, lifted her head to his, and offered him her lips, then snatched a kiss which filled them both with such a dizziness that it seemed to Henri as though the earth opened. And Paquita cried, "Enough, depart," in a voice which told how little she was mistress of herself. But she clung to him still crying, "Depart," and brought him slowly to the staircase. There the mulatto, whose white eyes lit up at the sight of Paquita, took the torch from the hands of his idol, and conducted Henri to the street. He left the light under the arch, opened the door, put Henri into the carriage, and set him down on the Boulevard des Italiens with marvelous rapidity. It was as though the horses had hell fire in their veins. The scene was like a dream to De Marsay, but one of those dreams which, even when they fade away, leave a feeling of supernatural voluptuousness, which a man runs after for the remainder of his life. A single kiss had been enough. Never had rendezvous been spent in a manner more decorous or chaste, or perhaps more coldly, in a spot of which the surroundings were more gruesome, in presence of a more hideous divinity. For the mother had remained in Henri's imagination like some infernal, cowering thing, cadaverous, monstrous, savagely ferocious, which the imagination of poets and painters had not yet conceived. In effect, no rendezvous had ever irritated his senses more, revealed more audacious pleasures, or better aroused love from its center to shed itself around him like an atmosphere. There was something sombre, mysterious, sweet, tender, constrained, and expansive, an intermingling of the awful and the celestial, of paradise and hell, which made De Marsay like a drunken man. He was no longer himself, and he was, withal, great enough to be able to resist the intoxication of pleasure. In order to render his conduct intelligible in the catastrophe of this story, it is needful to explain how his soul had broadened at an age when young men generally belittle themselves in their relations with women, or in too much occupation with them. Its growth was due to a concurrence of secret circumstances which invested him with a vast and unsuspected power. This young man held in his hand a sceptre more powerful than that of modern kings, almost all of whom are curbed in their least wishes by the laws. De Marsay exercised the autocratic power of an oriental despot. But this power, so stupidly put into execution in Asia by brutish men, was increased tenfold by its conjunction with European intelligence, with French wit, the most subtle, the keenest of all intellectual instruments. Henri could do what he would in the interests of his pleasures and vanities. This invisible action upon the social world had invested him with a real but secret majesty, without emphasis and deriving from himself. He had not the opinion which Louis XIV could have of himself, but that which the proudest of the caliphs, the pharaohs, the Xerxes, who held themselves to be of divine origin, had of themselves when they imitated God, and veiled themselves from their subjects under the pretext that their looks dealt forth death. Thus, without any remorse at being at once the judge and the accuser, De Marsay coldly condemned to death the man or the woman who had seriously offended him. Although often pronounced almost lightly, the verdict was irrevocable. An error was a misfortune similar to that which a thunderbolt causes when it falls upon a smiling Parisienne in some hackney coach, instead of crushing the old coachman who is driving her to a rendezvous. Thus, the bitter and profound sarcasm which distinguished the young man's conversation usually tended to frighten people. No one was anxious to put him out. Women are prodigiously fond of those persons who call themselves pashas, and who are, as it were, accompanied by lions and executioners, and who walk in a panoply of terror. The result, in the case of such men, is a security of action, a certitude of power, a pride of gaze, a leonine consciousness which makes women realize the type of strength of which they all dream. Such was De Marsay. Happy for the moment with his future, he grew young and pliable, and thought of nothing but love as he went to bed. He dreamed of the girl with the golden eyes, as the young and passionate can dream. His dreams were monstrous images, unattainable extravagances, full of light, revealing invisible worlds, yet in a manner always incomplete, for an intervening veil changes the conditions of vision. End of section 6. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey. Section 7 of The Girl with the Golden Eyes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Martin Geeson. The Girl with the Golden Eyes by Honoré de Balzac. Translated by Ellen Marriage. Section 7. For the next and succeeding day, Henri disappeared, and no one knew what had become of him. His power only belonged to him under certain conditions, and happily for him, during those 2 days he was a private soldier in the service of the demon to whom he owed his talismanic existence. But at the appointed time, in the evening, he was waiting, and he had not long to wait for the carriage. The mulatto approached Henri in order to repeat to him in French a phrase which he seemed to have learned by heart. "If you wish to come," she told me, "you must consent to have your eyes bandaged." And Cristemio produced a white silk handkerchief. "No," said Henri, whose omnipotence revolted suddenly. He tried to leap in. The mulatto made a sign, and the carriage drove off. "Yes!" cried De Marsay, furious at the thought of losing a piece of good fortune which had been promised him. He saw, moreover, the impossibility of making terms with a slave whose obedience was as blind as the hangman's. Nor was it this passive instrument upon whom his anger could fall. The mulatto whistled. The carriage returned. Henri got in hastily. Already a few curious onlookers had assembled like sheep on the boulevard. Henri was strong. He tried to play the mulatto. When the carriage started at a gallop, he seized his hands in order to master him and retain, by subduing his attendant, the possession of his faculties, so that he might know whither he was going. It was a vain attempt. The eyes of the mulatto flashed from the darkness. The fellow uttered a cry which his fury stifled in his throat, released himself, threw back De Marsay with a hand like iron, and nailed him, so to speak, to the bottom of the carriage. Then with his free hand he drew a triangular dagger and whistled. The coachman heard the whistle and stopped. Henri was unarmed, he was forced to yield. He moved his head towards the handkerchief. The gesture of submission calmed Cristemio, and he bound his eyes with a respect and care which manifested a sort of veneration for the person of the man whom his idol loved. But before taking this course, he had placed his dagger distrustfully in his side pocket and buttoned himself up to the chin. "That nigger would have killed me," said De Marsay to himself. Once more the carriage moved on rapidly. There was one resource still open to a young man who knew Paris as well as Henri. To know whither he was going, he had but to collect himself and count, by the number of gutters crossed, the streets leading from the boulevards by which the carriage passed, so long as it continued straight along. He could thus discover into which lateral street it would turn, either towards the Seine or towards the heights of Montmartre, and guess the name or position of the street in which his guide should bring him to a halt. But the violent emotion which his struggle had caused him, the rage into which his compromised dignity had thrown him, the ideas of vengeance to which he abandoned himself, the suppositions suggested to him by the circumstantial care which this girl had taken in order to bring him to her, all hindered him from the attention which the blind have, necessary for the concentration of his intelligence and the perfect lucidity of his recollection. The journey lasted half an hour. When the carriage stopped, it was no longer on the street. The mulatto and the coachman took Henri in their arms, lifted him out, and putting him into a sort of litter, conveyed him across a garden. He could smell its flowers and the perfume peculiar to trees and grass. The silence which reigned there was so profound that he could distinguish the noise made by the drops of water falling from the moist leaves. The two men took him to a staircase, set him on his feet, led him by his hands through several apartments, and left him in a room whose atmosphere was perfumed, and the thick carpet of which he could feel beneath his feet. A woman's hand pushed him onto a divan and untied the handkerchief for him. Henri saw Paquita before him, but Paquita in all her womanly and voluptuous glory. The section of the boudoir in which Henri found himself described a circular line, softly gracious, which was faced opposite by the other perfectly square half, in the midst of which a chimney piece shone, of gold and white marble. He had entered by a door on one side, hidden by a rich tapestried screen, opposite which was a window. The semicircular portion was adorned with a real Turkish divan, that is to say, a mattress thrown on the ground, but a mattress as broad as a bed, a divan 50 feet in circumference, made of white cashmere, relieved by bows of black and scarlet silk arranged in panels. The top of this huge bed was raised several inches by numerous cushions, which further enriched it by their tasteful comfort. The boudoir was lined with some red stuff, over which an Indian muslin was stretched, fluted after the fashion of Corinthian columns, in plaits going in and out, and bound at the top and bottom by bands of poppy-colored stuff on which were designs in black arabesque. Below the muslin, the poppy turned to rose, that amorous color which was matched by the window curtains, which were of Indian muslin lined with rose-colored taffeta, and set off with a fringe of poppy color and black. 6 silver-gilt arms, each supporting 2 candles, were attached to the tapestry at an equal distance to illuminate the divan. The ceiling, from the middle of which a lustre of unpolished silver hung, was of a brilliant whiteness, and the cornice was gilded. The carpet was like an oriental shawl. It had the designs and recalled the poetry of Persia, where the hands of slaves had worked on it. The furniture was covered in white cashmere, relieved by black and poppy colored ornaments. The clock, the candelabra, all were in white marble and gold. The only table there had a cloth of cashmere. Elegant flower pots held roses of every kind, flowers white or red. In fine, the least detail seemed to have been the object of loving thought. Never had richness hidden itself more coquettishly to become elegance, to express grace, to inspire pleasure. Everything there would have warmed the coldest of beings. The caresses of the tapestry, of which the color changed according to the direction of one's gaze, becoming either all white or all rose, harmonized with the effects of the light shed upon the diaphanous tissues of the muslin, which produced an appearance of mistiness. The soul has, I know not what attraction towards white. Love delights in red, and the passions are flattered by gold, which has the power of realizing their caprices. Thus all that man possesses within him of vague and mysterious, all his inexplicable affinities, were caressed in their involuntary sympathies. There was in this perfect harmony a concert of color to which the soul responded with vague and voluptuous and fluctuating ideas. It was out of a misty atmosphere, laden with exquisite perfumes, that Paquita, clad in a white wrapper, her feet bare, orange blossoms in her black hair, appeared to Henri, knelt before him, adoring him as the god of this temple whither he had deigned to come. Although de Marsay was accustomed to seeing the utmost efforts of Parisian luxury, he was surprised at the aspect of this shell, like that from which Venus rose out of the sea. Whether from an effect of contrast between the darkness from which he issued and the light which bathed his soul, whether from a comparison which he swiftly made between this scene and that of their first interview, he experienced one of those delicate sensations which true poetry gives. Perceiving in the midst of this retreat, which had been opened to him as by a fairy's magic wand, the masterpiece of creation, this girl, whose warmly colored tints, whose soft skin, soft but slightly gilded by the shadows, by I know not what vaporous effusion of love, gleamed as though it reflected the rays of color and light. His anger, his desire for vengeance, his wounded vanity, all were lost. Like an eagle darting on his prey, he took her utterly to him, set her on his knees, and felt with an indescribable intoxication the voluptuous pressure of this girl, whose richly developed beauties softly enveloped him. "Come to me, Paquita," he said in a low voice. "Speak, speak without fear," she said. "This retreat was built for love. No sound can escape from it. So greatly was it desired to guard avariciously the accents and music of the beloved voice. However loud should be the cries, They would not be heard without these walls. A person might be murdered, and his moans would be as vain as if he were in the midst of the great desert. Who has understood jealousy and its needs so well? Never question me as to that, she answered, untying with a gesture of wonderful sweetness the young man's scarf, doubtless in order the better to behold his neck. Yes, there is the neck I love so well, she said. Wouldst thou please me? This interrogation, rendered by the accent almost lascivious, drew de Marsay from the reverie in which he had been plunged by Paquita's authoritative refusal to allow him any research as to the unknown being who hovered like a shadow about them. And if I wished to know who reigns here? Paquita looked at him trembling. It is not I, then, he said, rising and freeing himself from the girl, whose head fell backwards. Where I am, I would be alone. Strike, strike, said the poor slave, a prey to terror. For what do you take me, then? Will you answer? Paquita got up gently, her eyes full of tears, took a poniard from one of the two ebony pieces of furniture, and presented it to Henri with a gesture of submission which would have moved a tiger. Give me a feast such as men give when they love, she said, and whilst I sleep, slay me, for I know not how to answer thee. Hearken, I am bound like some poor beast to a stake. I am amazed that I have been able to throw a bridge over the abyss which divides us. Intoxicate me, then kill me. Ah, no, no, she cried, joining her hands. Do not kill me. I love life. Life is fair to me. If I am a slave, I am a queen too. I could beguile you with words, tell you that I love you alone, prove it to you, profit by my momentary empire to say to you, take me as one tastes the perfume of a flower when one passes it in a king's garden. Then, after having used the cunning eloquence of woman, and soared on the wings of pleasure, after having quenched my thirst, I could have you cast into a pit where none could find you, which has been made to gratify vengeance without having to fear that of the law, a pit full of lime which would kindle and consume you until no particle of you were left. You would stay in my heart, mine forever. Henri looked at the girl without trembling, and this fearless gaze filled her with joy. No, I shall not do it. You have fallen into no trap here, but upon the heart of a woman who adores you, and it is I who will be cast into the pit. All this appears to me prodigiously strange, said de Marsay, considering her. But you seem to me a good girl, a strange nature. You are, upon my word of honor, a living riddle, the answer to which is very difficult to find. Paquita understood nothing of what the young man said. She looked at him gently, opening wide eyes which could never be stupid, so much was pleasure written in them. "Come then, my love," she said, returning to her first idea. "Wouldst thou please me?" "I would do all that thou wouldst, and even that thou wouldst not," answered De Marsay with a laugh. He had recovered his foppish ease, as he took the resolve to let himself go to the climax of his good fortune, looking neither before nor after. Perhaps he counted, moreover, on his power and his capacity of a man used to adventures, to dominate this girl a few hours later and learn all her secrets. "Well," said she, "let me arrange you as I would like." Paquita went joyously and took from one of the two chests a robe of red velvet, in which she dressed De Marsay, then adorned his head with a woman's bonnet, and wrapped a shawl round him. Abandoning herself to these follies with a child's innocence, she laughed a convulsive laugh, and resembled some bird flapping its wings, but he saw nothing beyond. End of section 7. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey.